At 2 degrees of warming, many of the big cities in South Asia and the Middle East would become so hot in summer you couldn't walk around outside without risking heat stroke or death. And that's just 2 degrees. The basic prediction about global warming has been proven exactly right, precisely right. If you took just the absolutely rudimentary understanding of the greenhouse effect that was put forward in the 19th century, added to the amount of carbon that we've put into the atmosphere over the last few centuries, you would get an extremely precise prediction that matches exactly with the amount of warming that we've had in the last few decades. At 2 degrees of warming, our agricultural yields would be significantly less bountiful, so we'd be having less food to feed more people. And the impacts are really everywhere you look. Flooding, hurricanes, other extreme weather, wildfires. It's estimated that at a little north of 2 degrees of warming in California, we'd probably have at least 4 times as many wildfires. And the impacts from China to Africa to the Middle East are just as dramatic. These are not challenges that can be contained or compartmentalized in any one place. The whole world would be transformed, and that's just 2 degrees. At a little north of there, 2.1 degrees, it's estimated that all of the major ice sheets in the planet would begin a permanent and irreversible melt, which means that no matter what we did at that point, we would lose all of that ice. That ice together would add at least 200 feet of sea level rise to the planet. And that would take centuries, so we'd have time to adjust. But 200 feet is enough to redraw the coastline of the US as far west as I-95 and to inundate every single beach that you've ever been on, much of Florida, and the whole coastline of the world on which 2/3 of all major cities sit. At 4 degrees of warming, which is where we're on track for at the end of the century, economists believe that we would have a global GDP that was probably 20% and possibly 30% smaller than it would be without climate change. 30% is an impact that's twice as deep as the Great Depression, and it would be permanent. It would mean $600 trillion in global climate damages, which is twice as much wealth as exists in the world today. There would be parts of the planet that would be hit by 6 climate-driven natural disasters at once. We would have twice as much war because there's a relationship between temperature and conflict. Our agricultural yields would be half as bountiful. We'd be dealing with mosquitoes carrying dengue and malaria flying as far north as the Arctic Circle. So public health would be completely scrambled as well. Everything that we know of as modern life, political life, cultural life would be scrambled by these forces. That's how dramatic they are, how inescapable they are. Now, of course, we'll adapt to some degree. We'll probably move some of these populations. We'll build some seawalls. We'll figure out ways to live in hotter and hotter climates. But when you take in the scale of what is possible, in fact, what is predicted to happen at 2100, at 4 degrees Celsius of warming, the challenges are so everywhere that no amount of adaptation, I think, will really allow us to live happily, prosperous lives, at least according to the standards that we have today. When I think about just how bad things can get, my mind often goes to what it would mean for a world to have 30% less GDP than it would without climate change. And I think about how the Great Depression affected the mental, emotional, political, psychological, and cultural lives of everyone who lived through it. And that we as a species would be living through that experience permanently. I'm struck by just how dramatically different the world will be if we let climate change continue unabated.